Good afternoon, and welcome to Good Afternoon with Spiritual Life. My name is Phil Rose. I'm the Director of Spiritual Life at Episcopal Homes. And during the pandemic, we have been reading the book by Sue Monk Kidd entitled When the Heart Waits. It is her memoir of going through her own spiritual crisis and the journey that took, about a year for her to go through this transformation. And the big message in it is the waiting in silence and waiting for the transformation to take place and to observing any of the pain and the different things that she might be experiencing. I think this is a particularly poignant read for us to be reading in the midst of this pandemic. So, when we had finished the other day, she was talking about a dream that she had about purchasing a butterfly tree, and I'm gonna reread that section again and take off into the next section called compassion. Owning the butterfly tree is a continuous process. Just as we constantly give birth to a more authentic Christ-like self, we need to constantly tap the spiritual energy necessary to nurture it. Compassion. Once you are a butterfly, you can really love, the kind of love that makes life new. Unquote. These words from Hope for the Flowers points us to the consummate gift that the soul presents, compassion. Meister Eckhart was adamant that compassion was the aim of all spiritual growth. I think that's one reason I like him so much. He had a big heart. He said if you were in ecstasy as deep as that of St. Paul, and there was a sick man who needed a cup of soup, it were better for you that you returned from the ecstasy and brought the cup of soup for love's sake. As the true self is born within us, the initial movement of soul is from the collective they to the ground of an authentic I. That's holy ground. Yet God calls us to a ground even holier. God calls us from the authentic I toward a compassionate we. As we emerge from the chrysalis, the illusion of separateness is shattered. We discover that God so loved the world that God gave us each other. We enter a vibrant knowing that we're one with every creature. In the contemplation of our waiting hearts, we so encounter the life of God in the soul that we begin to gradually draw from a new set of values and orientations, those of compassion. This movement is portrayed in an enchanting little book, Tales of a Magic Monastery. Quote, I sat there in awe as the old monk answered our questions. Though I am usually shy, I found myself raising my hand. Father, could you tell us something about yourself? He leaned back. Myself, he mused. There was a long pause. My name used to be me, but now it's you. Through our suffering, waiting, and growing, we tap more of the compassionate we experience. It's hard to do unless we first find our authentic self and become an I. Teilhard de Chardin tells us that the essential aspiration is to be united, that is, to become the other, while remaining oneself. It's only because we found our individual boundaries and truth that we can cross them to find a genuine oneness with others and not lose ourselves in the process. What does it mean to experience the compassionate we? The answer becomes clear when we look at the word compassion, which literally means come, with, and passion, suffering. To have compassion is to suffer with. It's not feeling a detached pity, but sharing the pain. Moving toward the compassionate experience makes us available with empathy to another. Just a quick aside, I can't think of a time when that compassion is more needed than right now as we endure this pandemic together, and that we begin to understand what the pain others might be experiencing is. Thomas Kelly put it beautifully. One might say we become ex- uh, cosmic mothers tenderly calling for all. Becoming a cosmic mother is very similar to de Foucault's idea of being a universal brother, and I would add a universal sister. It means to relate to the world in such a way that we see others not as strangers, but as part of us. This relatedness allows us to walk with them in their deep and wounded places. I gathered with a group of women one Sunday morning at Springbank. As we sat in a circle in the old log house, Kathleen, one of the Dominican sisters who lives at the center, led us in worship. She asked us to name those who were suffering, those whose cries were echoing in the world and inside our own hearts. We named the homeless, the hungry, the abused, the rejected, the poor, the lonely, the sick, the grieving, the fragmented, the worn down, the defeated, and those wounded by power, oppressed, and made inferior. As I looked at the women around me, compassion was shining in their faces and filling their eyes. It was as if they were the homeless and the hungry, those wounded by power and made inferior. They were every suffering man and woman and child. I wanted to clasp them to me and smooth their hair and tell them over and over that I was there with them. I was there. God help me. I was there. In a sense, we were a little group of cosmic mothers and universal sisters hearing the cries of the world, catching the tears of others and blending them with their own. That experience went to my core. It woke me up in a new way to the silent thundering of pain around me. It taught me the depth of feeling and connection it takes to draw the suffering human being to one's breast in a real act of healing. Not long afterward, I met a 32-year-old single woman during a layover in the Charlotte airport. She was a stranger, but because we both had 2 hours to wait, we fell into conversation at a corner table in the airport restaurant. We found that we were both writers traveling to the same conference. During the breaks in the conference, we talked about During the breaks in the conference, we talked as well. One evening, she told me about the devastating physical and emotional abuse she had suffered as a child. I've never known what it's like to be loved. My father deserted me, and my mother never touched me except to hit me. No one in my whole life has ever said to me the words, I love you. Her voice broke off into sobs. I felt them reverberate inside me like tiny explosions. Suddenly, I clasped her to me and told her, I'm here with you. I love you. And I did. I had loved her at Springbank before I even met her. Once divine compassion wakes us, and stretches out its tender arms inside us, we're never the same again. We're compelled to suffer with, wait with, cry with those around us. We want to relieve their pain as much as we're able, and by relieving theirs, we relieve God's. We do it for no reason except that compassion asks it. So I'm thinking about this, and I think this is the call to all of us during this pandemic is to suffer with, to deeply try to understand the pain that others are experiencing, either those who have lost loved ones, those who are sick or afraid, those who've lost jobs, those who are scared to go to their jobs. All of these people need our compassion. They need us to suffer with. So that's what we're called to do. We may not be able to go and visit people and hug them and hold their hand like we normally do, but we can embrace that suffering and know that God is suffering with them too. It's all throughout the Psalms. Back to the book. Another of Eckhart's wonderful sayings is that love has no why. We can't always separate out our motives and respond purely from love. There are often hidden agendas that grow out of the little game of What's in it for me? Yet real compassion flows from God within, from plenitude, not ego or neediness. Such compassion is always born within, not imposed or mandated from without. Jesus was walking, talking compassion. As we're able to live more out of our true self, that's what we become as well. We become Christ, showing an uncanny interest in the poor, the excluded, the despised, and the least. We find ourselves sitting by a Samaritan well, more interested in breaking down barriers than in religious do's and don'ts. We wrap a towel around our waist and wash the dirtiest feet around, proclaiming the preposterous message that there are no more lords and servants, no more ranks and hierarchies, but that we're all equal friends, serving one another. We amaze ourselves by coming to the rescue of an adulterous woman about to be stoned. We forgive the very ones who drive nails into our hands and our feet. The coming of the true self tosses us into the wreckage of the world and asks us to bind up what wounds we can and do our small part to recreate a planet of community and justice where there is fullness of life for everyone. Such a vision becomes real only as compassion inflames one small heart after another. In his book Night, Elie Wiesel wrote about his horrifying childhood experiences in the Nazi concentration camp. Having gone without food or drink for 3 days, thousands of Jews were driven out of their barracks at dawn into a thickly falling snow and herded into a field. Forbidden to sit or even move much, they stood in line until evening, waiting for a train that would take them deeper into Germany. The snow drifted in a layer on their shoulders. Finally, their thirst intolerable, one man suggested that they eat the snow, but they weren't allowed by the guards to bend over. The person in front of that man agreed to let him eat the snow that accumulated on the back of his shoulders, however. That act spread through the line until there, in a frozen field, what had been individuals struggling with their separate pain became a community sharing their suffering together. I'd never heard that image before. That is really powerful. The waiting heart arrives at the truth of compassion that will survive as a human family only as we're willing, one by one, to become the place of nourishment for our brother and sister. We'll survive as we cease being individuals struggling alone with our pain and instead become a community sharing our suffering in a great and holy act of compassion. Thank you very much for listening today. I hope that you are well. Today I'm sitting in compassion for the residents of the church home who have contracted COVID-19. Unfortunately, we have 11 new cases, and that is definitely something that needs our compassion and our prayer. And in the midst of that, I'm praying for our frontline workers that are busy caring for the people that are sick and connecting with their families to find out how they're doing, as well as the leaders making decisions about how to shift spaces to keep others safe from this virus. So today, keep them in your hearts and minds. Thank you for listening, and we will be back with Good Morning with Spiritual Life tomorrow morning as well. Thank you.